Hi friends, it's Lauren Taylor. Welcome back to my craft room today. I'm grateful to have you here. I'm going to be sharing some more projects using the August 2024 Spellbinders clubs. Here's a quick look at what I made during the Crafty Fun with Friends live that we did on the 1st of the month. I used the Better Press plates and the standard embossing folder, as well as a sentiment from the clear stamp of the month. I do also get the smaller die of the month membership, stitching die, stencil, and the 3D embossing folder. So I'm going to be using those for today's projects. So I have a piece of white cardstock. This is kind of a smoother white cardstock that I like to use for stenciling, and I've trimmed it to be A2 in size. I'm going to trim this down in a little bit, but I wasn't sure at the time of stenciling what I wanted the dimensions of this panel to be. So we're just going to go with A2, which is also going to fit the whole stencil design widthwise. So I'm going to start with the one stencil, and I thought I would do pink and green florals just as the vibe for my two cards today. So I'm going to bring out some Pink Fresh Studio inks. I have the cube versions of their inks, so that way I can afford them all. But also I really love that they are different hues of the same color, so I can blend really well with coordinating colors. So I'm using the Green Gables bundle, and I'm starting with the lightest color and a blending brush that I use for more of a teal-y green. This isn't quite teal, but definitely not more yellow. So it's more on the blue side of the greens. And I'm going to show all of my stenciling so you can see I'm using the lightest color in my blending brush just to add in some color. I didn't color in the whole stencil because I'm going to bring in the second color, the next shade, and color in the rest of those open areas. You could have also completely colored in the stencil with the lightest color and then bring in the next darker shade and just add shadow. I don't know why I didn't do that. I was just thinking of just building the color together and blending them together instead of layering the colors. I don't know if that makes sense. Either way you do it, it will look beautiful. And then I'm going to take the second stencil, so I'll show you how I lined it up here, but for the rest of the stencils I'm just going to jump through. I am doing my best to make sure the spaces of the stencil line up with the spaces of the design that I just stenciled. And I'm going to bring in the next shade, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm not going to add the color everywhere. I'm just going to go in and add this next color of these really pretty greens to the leaves and branches or vines or however you want this design to look. And then finally I'll bring in the darkest color and fill in the rest of the gaps through the stencil. And these are really pretty colors. I think they're going to look so nice with the pinks that I'm going to choose. I believe it's supposed to have a possible cherry blossom feel, maybe because the flowers in the clear stamp are cherry blossom, but these also remind me of like chamomile flowers, those little tiny yellow ones. So I think that would be really pretty as well. Instead of bringing in pinks, I want to bring in yellows next time because that's what it looks like to me. Those are some of my favorite flowers I get from Trader Joe's when I make bouquets. I guess they're white flowers with the little yellow middles, but so you can definitely make this a very pretty wildflower no matter what color you choose. For the pinks, I'm using the Rose Garden bundle, and I'm starting with the lightest color, and I'm going to do 2 shades for these flowers. There's 3 stencils for the flower details, so I'm using the lightest and the second lightest to color in most of these flowers. Again, just like I did with the leaves, I added in the lighter color, leaving some gaps, and then I'm bringing in the second tone and filling in anywhere where I see there are gaps in the stencil. Once I'm done adding the pink for these flowers, I'll go ahead and peel this layer off, and I will use stencil number 4 with the third shade. And this is going to fill in more of the centers of the flowers. There's not a lot of openings for the stencil. Since they're smaller and not that many, I'm just going to use one color. Once I'm done adding in the center of the flowers, I'll go ahead and bring in the last stencil. Now, I went kind of back and forth on how I wanted to use this last stencil. There are a lot of details on this last one that are not just for the flowers, but the leaves as well. And I wanted to use this darkest shade to color in the centers and the details of the flowers, but I didn't want to use it on the leaves, and I was a little too lazy to use masking tape over the leaves. I thought instead of using this last color that maybe I should have brought in a paste. You know, I love lunar paste and solar and astro and all the things, but I wasn't sure what color I wanted to do. Looking back, I think it would have been really nice to do more of a copper color through the stencil, but I decided to just add in the details for the flowers with that darkest shade of pink. I cleaned off the stencil and put it right back on, and now I'm using Astro Paste in Frostbite, which dries kind of a clear shimmer. And I'm adding this through the openings in the stencil. Now it does pick up quite a bit of the pink ink because that's what I had just put down onto the stencil before I cleaned it, so that ink is still kind of wet. So I wasn't able to save any excess of my Astro Paste, but I didn't waste too much, which was nice. And I'm going to do my final stencil reveal, and you can see the details on the flowers and the leaves. Now this is going to dry very clear. It's only going to be noticeable when you see the card in person and that the light hits it just right. So I'm going to clean off all my supplies, set that background aside to dry, and move on to stamping and some watercoloring. So I'm bringing in this beautiful floral arch image from the Clear Stamp of the Month, and I'm going to emboss it. So I'm going to use VersaFine Clair in Fallen Leaves and a clear detailed embossing powder. I found a piece of watercolor cardstock in my stash that I thought would fit just perfectly for this design. So I'll go ahead and use my rabbit hole design embossing tool to add my powder to my anti-static powder to my watercolor cardstock. I'm inking on my stamp, and I'm going to use my Stampendable just to help me apply some pressure. Now watercolor paper is textured, so I'm going to stamp it twice. You could stamp it 3 times if it needs it, but I was able to get a much cleaner stamp impression on the second try. So I'll go ahead and take that out, and I'm going to use my clear embossing powder with a coffee filter. This is just what I keep on my stash. It's just easy. The powder, I keep wanting to call it powdered sugar. The embossing powder does not stick to it, and it's so easy to clean up. So that's why I like using a coffee filter. I'll go ahead and pour the powder back into the jar. I warmed up my heat embossing tool, and I'm going to use that on my design. It melts the powder down until it creates like a very shiny plastic. And then I also stamped hello and just wanted to say in the same color. I embossed it with clear, and now I have all of my stamping ready to go. I was going to start die cutting, but then I was like, wait, I wanted to color first. So let me go ahead and clean up my area a little bit. I cleaned off my stamps, so I'm putting them away in my packaging. I'll set aside the dies that I'm going to use, and I'm going to grab my Distress watercolor pencils from Ranger and Tim Holtz, and I'm just going to speed up a little bit here and just show you a little bit of coloring. I have all of my pencils in rainbow order, but it looks like I'm using Saltwater Taffy as my base color for the flowers. So what I'm going to do is just pick up some water. It's sprayed there on my glass mat. I know you can't see it. And I added a water like layer to my first flower, and I'm bringing in that Saltwater Taffy and just adding the ink. So I picked up water, picked up the ink off the pencil, and then I am adding, or the paint off the pencil, and then I'm coloring in the flower. I'll go ahead and color in the rest of the flowers, and then I'm bringing in Worn Lipstick as a darker shade. So again, picked up water on my paintbrush, pick up the watercolor from the pencil, and then coloring my flower. So I'm adding this darker pink along the center of the flower just to create a little bit more dimension in the color. I'm also going to use the darker color where the petals kind of curl in, so to create that shadow look as the petals are curled. Once I'm done coloring all the flowers with these 2 shades of pink, I'm going to clean off my paintbrush and move into the greens. I'm using Lucky Clover as the first layer of color for all the leaves. Again, I did use water first, and then I'm bringing in Pine Needles to be the darker shade for the leaves. And once I'm all done with the green, again, I'll clean off my brush and I'm going to use the Scorched Timber pencil to color in the branch. That's the only brown I'm going to use. There's a lot of detail in the design of the stamp, so I don't think the branch really needs more than one color because there's a lot of shadow and dimension just in the design of the stamp itself. Once that's all done, I cleaned off my paintbrush. I set my piece here to dry for just a little bit, and now I'm going to do my die cutting. So I have the coordinating die set with the stamp set. The hello cuts out so cool, as well as the floral arch, and then there is a rectangle piece that will fit all of the smaller sentiments in the die set. So now that I have all those pieces ready to go, I'm checking on my stenciled background. Everything seems to be dry. It did warp a little just from being stuck onto the grip mat, and this is a thinner piece of white cardstock. So I'm just curling it, trying to get it a little more flat. When I adhere it down to my cardstock to put my card together, it will be flat. It's totally fine. So as you can see, the details on the leaves and flowers, well, the flowers are a little more obvious because of the ink, but the details on the leaves are really faint because it dried clear with that sparkle, the Frostbite Astro Paste. But when you see it in person, you can really see the details, and I think it looks really pretty. So I decided to cut off a 1/4 inch off of all 4 sides, but there was more white on the top than the bottom, obviously, in the design. So I cut off a 1/2 inch off the top and then a 1/4 inch from the left and right to give me a 1/4 inch border when I'm ready to glue this panel onto my cardstock. I thought it would be pretty to add some vellum in between the flowers and the stenciled design, just because it's a busy background and the image that I stamped and colored is also busy. And so I thought if I just trimmed down this piece of vellum, it would fit on a 3x4 vellum panel. But I didn't like the corners kind of sticking out around the arch. Now I know Spellbinders does sell an arch die set. I don't have it, so I did use what I already have in my stash, which is what I always recommend. But I do have an arch die set from scrapbook.com, and I noticed that there is an arch that I think fits the kind of curvature of the top of the stamp fairly well. So I'm going to use this just on the, I'm going to like really put it to the tip top of this vellum panel so it just cuts along the top edge there. And it will trim down the sides a teeny tiny bit, but since it's so close to the size of the vellum, the shape of the die, I'm going to use some mint tape to keep that die in place on my vellum and run it through my die cutting machine. When it's done, it's like almost perfect size. It fits so great behind the design of the stamp, and I really like that. I like the vellum peeking out without it being a rectangular panel behind an arched image. So now I'm going to start gluing my layers together. I did cut out a secondary design of the floral arch, just like an extra die cut out of watercolor cardstock, and I cut out hello 2 more times and the rectangle 2 more times. So I'm going to have the hello and just wanted to say those parts of my sentiments, they're going to be 3 layers thick. So I'm just using liquid adhesive to glue all these layers together. Then I'm gluing my 2 layers together for my cherry blossom flowers, and I didn't do 3 mostly because I didn't have enough scrap that would fit the design. So I thought 2 and the vellum is just fine. So once I got those 2 layers together, I added adhesive behind them and attached them to the vellum as well. So now all the different elements of my card are ready. I'm going to hold this down for a little bit, make sure it really sticks to the vellum. So let's get on to making the rest of our card. So I'll go ahead and grab a card base, and I'm going to layer my card base with some like craft cardstock. This is Desert Storm from Neenah, but there are a lot of great craft colored cardstock out there. So I'm trimming the cardstock to be A2 in size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and that will attach to my card base. So I'll go ahead and adhere my stenciled background onto my craft cardstock just using my sturdy tape runner. This is a retired Scotch tape gun. I think ATG. I forget what A is. Is it automatic? I don't know. It's a tape gun. It's huge. They don't make it anymore, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would link it down below. I know some people have asked me in the past, but just use your favorite tape runner. So now I'm going to work out the spacing. I know I need my design to be pretty close to the top of my panel so my sentiments will fit. I'm going to go ahead and use liquid adhesive to add glue to the back of my cherry blossom arch design panel here. And I'm attaching this to my card front. I made sure not to get glue past the design cutout because I didn't want it to be visible through the vellum. So I'll go ahead and hold that in place for a while, make sure it adheres. And then I'll add adhesive behind the hello sentiment, and I'll go ahead and get that added on to the card front. I'm going to have it be as low as possible without it, looking too low, if that makes sense. So adding liquid adhesive, I'm going to use the grid and I'm going to attach the hello. I want it to look like it was spaced about just as far as it is on the top part of that arch. And then I fit the just wanted to say rectangle right in between, and it looks really nicely and like evenly spaced. With that, the card is done, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that card base that I prepped, and I'll use a scoring tool to help me just fold the score line. I'm a big top folding card person, so my card is top folding. I'm adding that adhesive to the back of my card front, and then I'm going to adhere it to my card base. I always start from one of the corners of the scored fold, just in case my card front is a little too small. I can trim down any excess of that white cardstock. Here's a close-up look at how beautiful this first floral card turned out. I absolutely love the stamped image and the stencil together. I just think this card looks so darn cute. For my second card, I'm just going to use one die from the stitching die of the month and a sentiment from different dies from the die set, the smaller die set of the month. And I went through a lot of my Spellbinders cardstock scraps that I had, and I'm going to die cut at this time I have 5 colors. 5 colors of cardstock with that stitching rectangle. I will bring in a 6th one later because I don't like the spacing when I get to the card assembly point, but these are the colors that I've picked. I've linked them down below in my supply list, but I believe, because these are all scraps, it is Barely Peach, Brush Gold, Dahlia, Fern, Peach Sorbet, and Pink Sand, and Portobello, which you'll see later. So I'm going to die cut a bunch of those stitched rectangles from the stitching die, and then I die cut the Miss You Babe. I thought this would be a really cute, like, send to your girlfriend kind of card, and I die cut the words out of the pink cardstock. Again, I believe this is Pink Sand, and then the shadow out of the brushed gold cardstock, because I'm going to use a gold stitching thread for my stitching dies, so I wanted to tie in a little bit more gold with my die cutting. I'm going to start with putting my sentiment together, so I'm adding adhesive, liquid adhesive to the back of my sentiments in pink, and then adhering them to the gold shadow. Now the little tittle of the eye, I did use a jewel picker just to help me make sure I get that in place, but that's just how I put these together. I love these die sets that Spellbinders has been putting out with the shadow. It just makes everything so much easier to adhere to a card when you don't have to put like foam adhesive behind these tiny thin sentiments. So love the shadows. So I have the Miss You Babe ready to go. I'll go ahead and set those aside. Now the stitching die set is this really cute like watercolor palette paintbrush set, but I wanted to show that you could use these rectangles for something else other than a watercolor palette. So I'm just going to create a little border of these different rectangles on my card. So I'm going to just show you stitching of one of these rectangles. I'm using a gold thread from DMC, as well as their needles. I got both of these from Spellbinders, so I'll go ahead and link those in my supply list as well. And I cut a long piece of the gold thread and I threaded it onto a needle, and I'm going to start with threading one of my rectangles. So I started in a corner, and I always start from the bottom and I go through the design, and I just follow the little embossed lines that it makes. There's these little impression lines for their stitching dies, and it makes the stitching dies just so easy to put together. So the design just goes in kind of a like star, or not star, but like sun ray kind of pattern. So I started in one corner and I thread it to the center, and then I move on to the next opening, thread it back through the center, and I'm just moving in a clockwise direction all the way around, every time looping my thread back in through the center. I am doing my best to keep the string taut so it's nice and straight looking on the front, as well as the back, but you won't see that. But I don't want to pull it too tight because I don't want my paper to curl or bend, but I don't want it to be too loose to where the string just looks kind of messy. So I'm going through and I'm going to finish up pretty close here. I have a couple more holes to go through. And again, it's just the same thing over and over again, coming up through the back and then back to the other side through the center. Once I'm done, I'm going to trim the excess of my gold thread and I'll save what was left over for the next rectangle. And I'm gonna skip here because it's so hard to see. My hands block everything, but I'm just tying a double knot. I'm using my magnets just to hold my rectangle in place, but it's just easier for my fingers if I just hold the first knot with my finger and then tie the second knot. I'm trimming off any excess so it doesn't show on through the edges of the rectangle, and then I went ahead and did the rest of my die cut colors. Like I said, I will do one more off camera in just a bit. I will show you the spacing here in just a moment, and I don't like it, so I needed one more rectangle. I wasn't really sure how I wanted to create the layout, but I do know that I wanted to use a 3D embossing folder in the background. There's these beautiful like rose floral designs. So I'm actually taking a piece of bisque cotton cardstock and I trimmed it down to 4 by 5 1/4, so just slightly smaller than A2. And you can see here I'm going to use those rectangles as a kind of border on the bottom, and I didn't like the spacing. I needed one more. So I went ahead and die cut a Portobello rectangle, did the gold stitching on it, and I just think it's going to look a lot better. Now I'm going to use my 3D embossing folder to create a design just on the top portion of my bisque cotton cardstock. Now I already sprayed it with water and I went to run it through my die cut machine with the design on the side, and I realized this isn't going to fit in my 6-inch wide machine. So I moved the cardstock to the bottom of my embossing folder and just did a partial embossing. So that way there was enough room for my little rectangles to attach and have a flat cardstock behind my rectangle, so the design just shows on the top portion of my background. Next, I'm going to trim down some foam adhesive and attach it to the back of my rectangles. Now, I got a little nitpicky here and cut 2 small pieces so that way the adhesive wouldn't show through any of the holes in the design. I think that's just an extra step that you don't necessarily have to do. You can just apply one long piece of foam adhesive, but I didn't want anything to show through that center hole. So I added foam adhesive behind all of my rectangles. I'm going to use my grid mat to help me with getting the spacing looking pretty good. It doesn't end up being perfect space, but I do think it looks pretty close. And so I'm going to get them kind of spaced out, and then I will start on the left and I will add in that light pink rectangle, and then I'll move all the way across until I get to green. I'm going to skip the green one and I'm going to add the brown kind of gray color, the Portobello color, and then I'll add the green last, and that's just so at least the first and the last look even. And then the green one, I'm just trying to make it even between the two, the left and the right. And I think it looks pretty close to even. I put foam adhesive behind the Miss You Babe sentiments, so I'll go ahead and get those attached, and I'm adding those just above my stitched rectangles. And kind of similar to how I added the rectangles, I'm going to start with the babe, and then I'm going to add the miss, and then I'll add you in the center, just so that way I can get those words as centered and evenly spaced as possible. Now I liked the white design, or not white, I guess it's kind of off-white. It is the bisque color, but I just felt like it was missing some color. So I'm going to bring in Tattered Rose Distress Oxide, and I'm just going to blend a little bit. I'm going to add kind of a vignette look to the top, just an ombre of the color, be a little heavier in the ink along the edge and let it fade into the white. And while I didn't love it at first, when the card is done, I'm really happy that I did that. I think it just adds a little more dimension, and you can see those flowers a lot more now, having a little bit of ink on them. I'm going to trim a piece of green cardstock to be my A2 panel, so it's 5.5 by 4.25, and I'll go ahead and adhere my embossed and put together card front onto that green cardstock, and then this will be a top folding card except in landscape, so it's a normal side folding card just turned on its side. I'll go ahead and attach that card front to my card base after this. But as I was getting ready to finish off the card, I wanted to add a little more gold. I love a good shimmer on my cards. So I'm bringing in the Starry Color pigment inks, and I'm going to use this more bluey gold. I thought it matched the cardstock and the embroidery thread the best. I thought I would just put splatter where the embossed flowers were, but I thought, you know what, let's just go for it. And I splattered the whole card front. After that, I'll grab that card base like I was just talking about. I'm going to give my watercolor just a little time to dry, and then I will go ahead and add that to my card front, or to my card base. I'm going to use that same double-sided adhesive ATG that I love. It's very sticky. Once it goes down, it's down for life. So again, I like to start on the scored corner and add my card front to my card base. So let's go ahead and take a close-up look at this card. I think it's so pretty. I love this 3D embossing folder. It's absolutely stunning. I hope using the stitching dies a little differently than intended brings you some more inspiration on how to use your stitching die set of the month. But let's take one more look at the other cards. Again, this is my new favorite card. It changes almost every day, but I love that design. And here's the card again that I made on the live. So these are my 3 projects for the August 2024 Spellbinder Club kits. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!